Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be able to provide some background music for you as you eat your delicious lunches. To our students who are present, our graduates, our trustees, our colleagues from Yale Divinity School, welcome. I'm so pleased to see my predecessor and mentor and friend, Martin Copenhaver, here today, who I know is here both as a YDS alum and a great lover of Andover Newton, and heading to some kind of high school reunion, I think, on the other side of this with our faithful trustee, David Blair. What happened in high school will stay in high school. If you're a churchgoer or a minister, you might have spent last weekend meditating on the leper who came back, because this passage was appointed in the Common Lectionary. It comes from the 17th chapter of the Gospel according to Luke, beginning at the 12th verse. As Jesus entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then Jesus said to the one who was healed, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Who preached on that last Sunday? Show of hands? Show of hands. Big whole bunch, big whole bunch. This passage has carried special meaning for me in my ministry, the first 10 years of which I devoted to campus religious life. I served as a staff member at a university church, same one as Chaz Howard, Memorial Church, Harvard Yard. I was a residential and academic baby dean for first-year students, and later I became the director of a campus ministry center at a big state school. In that work, I sometimes found myself discouraged that such a small proportion of the various student bodies I served were invested in campus religious life. I felt like we were making a difference, yet to count noses wouldn't necessarily lead a person to that conclusion. One of my early research interests, as I went on to doctoral work in education, was around the question, how do we evaluate campus ministry? I found the question of assessing the impact of campus ministries interesting because I believed, and I still believe, the mere presence of a campus ministry organization on a university campus changes the culture of the community. Whereas funders, like denominations, regional offices, charged with distributing scarce resources, were understandably concerned with numbers of participants, I knew there was a bigger story to be told. In my first job out of college before Divinity School, I worked for Habitat for Humanity's Campus Chapters Department. The organization's founder and president at the time, Millard Fuller, used to say to whoever asked that our department was his favorite. Why? Because even if the campus chapter was small, its presence meant that generations of educated people would graduate knowing Habitat existed, and that there were people out there working to provide God's children with simple, decent places to live. Universities are, after all, meant to bring together whole universes. They aspire to represent a microcosm of the world, so they might educate people toward worldliness. The campus ministry I served at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee had a participation pattern similar to those of most churches I know. We had a core group of 5 or 10 students who showed up for everything. Then there was one circle out of those who showed up for particular kinds of opportunities, and then a wider one of those who would come and go. There were some who only knew we existed from having walked by a flyer or seen the sign on our building. We didn't have anything resembling membership, and we treated everyone like they were home when they were in our space. Over the years that I served as that community's minister, every few weeks, a student would show up in crisis. I'd find them on our front porch, trying to figure out whether to ring the bell, crying, staying out of view from the street. One had come to realize that her parents were both addicted to drugs. Another had been physically harmed by her husband. Another had been unceremoniously dumped by her first love. What circle of involvement they came from at that point didn't matter. They needed some place to go, and they associated a faith community with that someplace. That impression in their minds was indicative of a mentality that they and others would carry with them into the wider world. There's a place I can go where there is love. During those years of studying how we measure campus ministry's impact, I was also trying to assess the effectiveness of our own ministry, and our passage from Luke helped me to make sense of it. God heals everyone in some way, and God's not at all needy about it. Whether God is thanked or not has more to do with the quality of our lives than it has with God's ego. The one who returned to thank Jesus has been made not just leprosy-free, but well, reconciled to the community, restored to relationships, more fully aware of the incredible mystery that is life and God's love. Last week in Marquand Chapel, Andover Newton Seminary at Yale Divinity School's student, Natalie Owens Pike, or Nop, preached on this text for her senior sermon. As fellow Andover Newton student Avern Payne read the scripture before Nop's sermon, 10 students rose from where they were sitting and acted out the parts. It took all of us a second to figure out what was happening, and it was incredibly moving. Our first, second, and third year students totally got into character. No holding back, no self-conscious snickering. They threw themselves into this story. Last Sunday at Memorial Church in Harvard Yard, Andover Newton Seminary at YDS graduate, the Reverend Calvin Jones, also preached on the leper who came back to give thanks. He entitled his sermon, "A Letter from a Leper," and the entire message was in the first person, from the point of view of one who understood healing in a new way, as if for the first time. Our students and graduates are doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? How might we assess our ministries using the healing of the lepers as a guide? The healing of the lepers gets us over our mental numbers game. How many people apply to and enroll in a school matters, just as how many people attend or join a church matters. But it's not all that matters. In evaluation speak, it's an indicator, not an impact. Impact radiates outward from a community, and it resonates forward through time. Put differently, I learned from our passage from Luke that counting thankful lepers in 2 dimensions, numerically, tells only a sliver of the story. We have to look at the 3-dimensional person and the impact they will have on those around them. And we have to look at the 4th-dimensional impact that spans forward from this day, back starting 2,000 years ago. Now, with all this background, how might we assess the state of our school, Andover Newton Seminary at Yale Divinity School, at this point in time? There's no reason not to start with numbers, especially now that you've heard my thoughts on their importance but limited usefulness. Yale Divinity School has 375 students. A little more than half are part of the MDiv program, so just under 200. Of those 200, 51 are enrolled in Andover Newton's diploma program, participating in our colloquia and following our requirements as they make choices within the MDiv program's flexibility. Our program doesn't segment students off, away from the rest of YDS. The hope is that they're committed to learning with Andover Newton while also fully connected with all of YDS while they're with us. We then hope they go on after they graduate to minister in a particular context while connecting deeply in their local and wider communities. Andover Newton's activities beyond the classroom, which include worship and other forms of spiritual and community development, are available to all YDS. And students from outside the diploma program take full and wonderful advantage of them. Just as importantly, everyone knows we're here, and we hope that they know they're welcome. We're now working to expand our impact, not just through those whom we graduate into the world to make it better, but through creating and sharing knowledge for and about ministry. This alumni convocation provides meaningful reconnection and new learning that you can carry out from this place and relay it to others. You'll soon receive invitations for our spring lecture series, as well as information about YDS's revamped summer study in which Andover Newton participates every year. In our sixth year on this campus, our embedded institution is maturing. We've been through a lot, from the trauma of having had to move, to the excitement of moving to a new and amazing setting full of promise, from the creativity sparked by imagining a new educational program for ministry, to the confidence gained by relying on the accrued wisdom of the generations that came before us. From a grand opening of our New Haven campus facilities to a COVID-19 rethink of how we could be together, suffice it to say, these have felt like dog years. We have more growing to do. We're currently making our way toward legal, permanent affiliation with Yale, as the 5-year transition process has been sufficiently successful for us to say we're ready to go all the way, remaining a distinct entity while blending the business end of our shared work. We have an affiliated faculty of 9, and we're budgetarily responsible for 2 faculty lines, but only one of those 2 is endowed. We're now working to endow the 2nd chair, and to do so in honor of George Washington Williams, barrier-breaking, bridge-building civic leader, and Newton Theological Institute's first African-American graduate. You'll have an opportunity to learn more about that initiative in a workshop that you heard about with Jairicus Collins, graduate of Andover Newton Seminary at Yale Divinity School. We're gathering all that we learned from the life-changing border-crossing immersion program of our past and advancing it into our future as Emmaus Encounters, building community on the road. This new program will focus on teaching our students how to build community within groups and beyond groups, anywhere they're called into ministry. We had our first pilot initiative associated with Emmaus Encounters when a group of trustees and student and stakeholders went to visit our mission partners in Hawaii in August. And we rekindled relationships where our partners in Hawaii are asking the same questions we are about what missions really means. Other initiatives that have immediate relevance to our local impact: my colleague Ned Parker, working with my other colleagues, Jaquan Beecham and student staffer Christine Geeting, are developing a pulpit supply program that gives our students opportunities to practice preaching and spread the word of what God is doing here at Andover Newton and in their lives. We have 21 students signed up and twice that number of pulpit openings. Christine can now add Yenta to her ministry CV. Many of you might be worried about the church of today and of the future. Truth be told, I am too. You might have noticed that church-goer numbers post-COVID are very low. Somehow, soccer leagues came out of COVID having forgotten we'd ever asked them to lay off Sunday mornings. Somehow, the flexibility to attend worship from home became an option not just afforded, but expected, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's an adjustment. Those of you who attend or lead worship in church have probably seen plenty of Sundays where only 1 in 10 are present. Seeing that might have been a source of discouragement, but it shouldn't disillusion us, as those numbers were never what it was about for Jesus. Sure, Jesus noticed that only 1 leper came back to give thanks, but he was mainly happy for that thankful, healed person. Jesus knew this healed person's life was going to be better for having known how blessed he was. And Jesus knew he'd pass it on. Our partner church's attendance numbers are, in some cases, small. Our school is small. The widow's mite was small. A mustard seed is small. The catalyst we add to a substance might be small, but chemistry teaches us that the catalyst changes the very nature of the substance, utterly and irreversibly, nonetheless. That's why this passage about a leper who said thank you gives me encouragement. Not that I've needed a lot of encouragement, because I have them. I've never been as confident as I am right now that Andover Newton is where it needs to be, doing what it's called to do, and sending catalysts out in the world to make it well. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Thank you, Dean Drummond. It is now time for us to confer the Spirit of the Hill Award. The Spirit of the Hill Award is conferred to someone, a person with devotion to renewing the church and society through ecumenical witness and creative expression of the gospel and commitment to enacting God's ways of justice and love in the world. The faith and courage provided by liberating visions that compel them toward thoughtful, compassionate, and timely responses to cultural and religious conflict. The ability to respectfully cross borders within and across religious traditions and to help others do the same, thus serving as repairers of the breach. Efforts to promote the fellowship among Andover Newton Theological School and now Andover Newton Seminary graduates, and commitment to the school's mission through contributions of time and energy in the past, in the present, or in the future. This year, this will be the first year that we confer the award on a new plaque. The new plaque does not say Andover Newton Theological School, Spirit of the Hill Award recipient. It does not say Andover Newton Seminary, Spirit of the Hill recipient. It says Andover Newton alumni, Spirit of the Hill recipients. And to offer this year's Spirit of the Hill, I invite a former Spirit of the Hill recipient forward, Davida Foy Crabtree.
My friends, it is my joy to present to you this year's recipient of the Spirit of the Hill Award. She is a woman who is dear to my heart, a woman who has been deeply rooted in Christian faith and radically open to what God is doing now, and has inspired and mentored generations of clergy in the United Church of Christ and beyond. She is a woman who has stood for justice and for peace, who has stood for radical openness and inclusion in the life of the church, because she knew in her own life how imperative that is for everyone. Jane Heckles, the Reverend Dr. Jane Heckles, is this year's recipient. I'm wondering how many of you have known Jane. Could we see yes, a good number of you have known Jane, and some of you, when I describe her ministry, will recognize her even more. Jane graduated from Andover Newton in 1980, earning the Master of Divinity degree, and went off to serve in a parish here in Connecticut in the little town of Brooklyn in the northeast corner. She then very soon was called back to Andover Newton to work as Director of Development. In her years as Director of Development, 11 years, I think it was, or 10, that she served as Director of Development, she more than doubled the amount of donor giving. She served as adjunct faculty in the arena of generosity and stewardship, both at Andover Newton and later in life at Claremont Seminary in Claremont, California. Jane was a woman of deep wisdom. She was, to my mind, old before her years. She had such maturity, such wisdom, such ability to cut through to the very heart of what we were discussing at any given moment. This was a woman who grabbed my heart and who made a huge difference in my own life, because when I went as conference minister to the Southern California Conference of the United Church of Christ, I succeeded a man whom I dearly loved and deeply respected, and who had been there for 30 years. So my road in those early years was not easy. And to my great joy, Jane's wife, Kathleen Greider, was called to the faculty of Claremont School of Theology, which meant that Jane was only 45 minutes away from the conference office. She sent me her resume to network with me about what positions she might possibly be able to find in Southern California, and I did not share her resume with anyone else. I don't think I've ever moved so fast to bring somebody onto a staff as I did in that moment. But Jane came onto our staff part-time as minister for stewardship and made a transforming difference in the lives of the churches of the Southern California Conference. I wouldn't want to say more than that, but equally, she made a huge difference for me personally, because she was the person who, when something was going on, I could lean toward and say, "What do you think is happening here?" And what would come back to me would be the wisest insight, just the wisest insight about what was happening among the people who were gathered in that place, about the political dynamics, because there are always political dynamics in human institutions, and about the possibilities. She made me a better person. She made me a better leader. Jane, in her years in Southern California, chose to do her Doctor of Ministry degree at Andover, Newton, all the way across the country. That's how loyal she was, but also how perspicacious she was, to use an Andover, Newton Seminary word, how perspicacious she was about where the best education could be for her. She did her Doctor of Ministry degree on the question of the stewardship experience of churches that voted to be open and affirming, and discovered in the course of her research and her work that indeed churches that voted to become open and affirming, while they might lose one or two families initially, became much stronger, and stronger not only in membership and in spiritual growth, but stronger also in their stewardship and giving and generosity. It was a life-changing study for the United Church of Christ, because there were so many who were reluctant around open and affirming because they were so afraid of what might occur. But Jane's dissertation made a huge difference in that, and more than that, her witness in the midst of the United Church of Christ changed all that. She then went on to become co-conference minister of the Southern California Nevada Conference with the Reverend Dan Romero. And in that context, Jane, as always throughout her life, had insights about ways to build bridges among all the diverse communities of Southern California and across the United Church of Christ. Her witness to our opening our hearts to one another and our diverse experiences continues to resonate to this day. She, at one point, became for 12 or 13 years a member of the national staff of the United Church of Christ, and there she created the campaign that some of you may be familiar with, which was called Changing Lives, to help people of our churches understand the ways in which our giving through the national setting of the United Church of Christ actually touches and transforms the lives of people, that it's not a giving to bureaucracy, it's a giving to transformation. Following that time of service, she felt a pull then back to parish ministry and took a position as interim at University Church in San Diego, and there was deeply loved, and she deeply loved them. But then the National United Church of Christ decided to partner with the Episcopal Church in the development of a program specifically for the UCC, adapted from the Episcopal Church, called Credo, which was a program run nationwide, invitational for clergy, generally in the midst of their careers, who needed and wanted to grow in their spiritual depth, in their financial understanding, their stewardship of their lives, and their partnership and companionship with other clergy. Jane created Credo in such a way that it became essential to our life. And there may be people in this room who benefited from Credo and who could indeed bear testimony to the way in which it changed our relationships with one another. Jane led with love. She led with wisdom. She led with faith, a depth of faith and joy that was unsurpassed. She died this past spring, and so we present this. I knew I would do this. So we present this award to her posthumously with great love, great respect, and great esteem. And I am so pleased that she is being recognized in this time.
Davida, thank you so much for your words. And here to accept the award on Jane's behalf is her brother, Bill, who will be reading words from Jane's spouse, Kathleen.
Thank you all for the opportunity to be with you today. Technology willing, we would have had Kathleen do a video or something, so I am her voice. Keep in mind I'm reading her remarks on her behalf. On behalf of the family of Reverend Dr. Jane Heckles, I want to convey our gratitude that she and her decades of ministry are being recognized and remembered with this award. Jane was first drawn to Andover Newton Theological School in the late 1970s because of the spirit on that hill. The spirit was birthing new liberations that made for many marginalized persons somewhat safer religious space. Jane found and used ants as space to develop alongside other women and other lesbians and other theological progressives a more authentic way of being religious leaders than would have been possible at most seminaries. In that liberating spirit, Jane took her Andover Newton education into diverse dimensions of church and social life. It was important to her, wherever she was serving, to offer intelligent competence and pragmatism. Of course, her skill with finances and technology won her friends as well. But arguably most important, she lent her faith to many frightened and troubled persons and communities. Her way of living out the Christian faith was grounded in inclusivity, kindness, honesty, and hopefulness of Jesus of Nazareth. As all of us do, she sometimes fell short of such standards, but not very often. I, her brother, and our families thank the Board of Directors of the Alumni Association for awarding to Reverend Dr. Jane Heckles the Spirit of the Hill Award. Though it is given posthumously, I can assure you she would have been deeply moved and appreciated by receiving this award. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Davida. Thank you, Kathleen. I hope that you're able to watch this recording. Thank you for sharing those words. I also want to recognize those others who have received the Spirit of the Hill. I know that there are a handful in this room. Virginia Child, I'm looking at you. Davida Foy Crabtree, Don Ing. I know that there are a few. Please stand and be recognized for your achievement. Melissa Heim. Finally, we it's been a little hard to do some things over the past few years. And one of the things when it comes to alumni convocation that has been difficult to do is to recognize those graduates celebrating the 50th year of their graduation. Yeah, I heard a wow. And maybe even an amen in there. Amen. This is going to be you in 48 years. Emily Bruce, you hear me? God willing, God willing. So this year we recognize graduates from 3 classes, the class of 1970, the class of 1971, and the class of 1972. Now let's think about 1970, 71, and 72. Let's just think about these for a second. In 1970, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty goes into effect after ratification by 43 nations. Paul McCartney announces that the Beatles have disbanded. 1970. 100,000 people demonstrate in Washington, D.C. against the Vietnam War. National Guards fire and kill 4 protesters at Kent State University. They're graduates of Kent State sitting in this room today. And those words from Apollo 13 came over that speaker in Texas, Houston, "We have a problem." 1971, the New York Times begins to publish sections of the Pentagon Papers. The Walt Disney Park in Florida opens. All right. Education Secretary Margaret Thatcher ends free school milk for anyone over the age of 7. A new stock market index called the NASDAQ debuts. 1972, 5 White House operatives are arrested for burglarizing the offices of the Democratic National Committee to start the Watergate investigation. The United States and Soviet Union sign the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. But at the same time, Bloody Friday happens in Belfast, Ireland, where 22 bombs go off. Anti-war demonstration draws 100,000 to U.S. cities. These are times that required people who were willing to lead with love, to dive in. Now, some who graduated from Andover Newton, they may have gone to do parish ministry. Some may have graduated and gone to do military chaplaincy, and you just heard the list of the things that were happening militarily. Others may have gone to live their lives in a form of ministry in other ways. But this was a world that needed leaders who loved it. Do you hear what I'm saying? And so today, we recognize those graduates of 1971, 70, 71, and 1972. I invite them forward. I do have recognitions for those of you who registered ahead of time, and those who don't, I'm going to mail you them, but you can see what they look like. So graduates of 1970, 71, and 72, please come forward and be recognized. Richard Jones of 1970. Richard? You're welcome. Davida, where are you? Here you are. 1972. Robert McFarland, 1971. Is Bob here? I haven't seen Bob today. Okay. And finally, David Brown, 1972. I will have one made for you and send it to you. Thank you so very much. My friends, 50 years after graduating Andover Newton.
and still kicking.
Thank you all. Thank you all for making the journey here and celebrating this milestone. Thanks to all of you for making the journey here, celebrating these milestone moments, a state of the school, and this spirit of the hill, and graduates coming back after 50 years. How can we express the depth of our gratitude for your presence in this place? Thank you. Thank you.